What's up, BookTube? It's Monty, and today I'm here to talk about the Blackathon group book, The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I don't have a physical copy because I returned it because I filmed a discussion and then I deleted the footage. So we have the picture. It's going to be here for the whole video. You can look at the pretty cover, do what you want to do with the picture. So, I read the book on the second day of Blackathon, the first day. I started reading it that first day. I think I finished it the following morning. And I found myself really not understanding how to rate it. I didn't publicly rate the book, just like I didn't publicly rate The Princess Saves Herself in this one. There are a couple of books this year that I've decided not to put a star rating on Goodreads. For the simple fact that for those two, they were poetry collections. And, well, technically, The Poet X is a novel. But they're both written in verse, and it was really hard for me to judge the verse in a way that I felt was fair because it is a new to me sort of genre of writing a book, like a formatting. It's not really a genre, a format of writing a book. At least a narrative book. Like both of those are supposed to have narratives. But anyway, so it wasn't that I think the poetry for the Poet X is bad. I'm pretty sure if I had listened to the audiobook, I would have appreciated it more. It's just that because I read it, it was not something I was connecting to. Um, and I found that with a lot of these diaspora stories, and I did not want to impact the Goodreads rating because while they're not important to me, I do understand for a lot of people they really hold a lot of stock and a lot of value. And so, because I wasn't connecting with the diaspora stories that I've been reading lately, it felt sort of wrong to downgrade the Goodreads rating. Now, going into the novel, I knew that Xiomara was Afro-Latina. Um, that's fine. It's not like I hated the fact that she was Afro-Latina. It was just that there were certain aspects of her narrative that did not connect with me as a Black American, just a regular Black person. Um, there are obviously overlaps, and I think that there were messages and things in the book that I think were actually really well handled, such as, Black girls and just Latinx girls, like their bodies not being their own at some point. And just, I mean, obviously women in general, like, have to deal with a bunch of, like, shit where men think that they own their bodies. But there's a special place in that spectrum for women of color, but specifically for Black girls who are often seen as older than they actually are, who are harassed as Yomar is in this book. Like there were elements of that where I was like, it is not my place to judge it. Like I felt that it was handled well, and I thought it was I appreciated how that was written, and I thought that it highlighted an aspect of society, like of the young adult time that isn't always highlighted in books. Like I feel like most books are escapism, and so when you're reading to escape, like you don't want to read about street harassment. Like that's not like I feel like that's not what people are trying to read. Like I get it, so I understand why it's not a major component, but I appreciated the fact that it was. Um, Other than that, my major problem with the book, which is on a certain level petty, and on a certain level I think warrants an actual discussion, is I did not like how Elizabeth Acevedo treated Xavier. And this is not his narrative, and so it's not that I felt that he should have been in the narrative more, but because I had a whole discussion about queer men and their hypervisibility, I feel the need now to talk about them every time I read a novel because it's just the representation in this one bothered me because Xavier is the only person in the narrative that has a nickname. He is always referred to as Twin, and that really bothered me because I felt that was like really dehumanizing in a way. Um, Not that nicknames are inherently dehumanizing, but Twin is like not a fucking name. Like it's just not a name. It's not. And he was the only person that had a nickname, and the nickname itself was dehumanizing. I mean, technically, his little boyfriend had a nickname. She called him White Boy, but that just felt like a cultural thing. So I let that pass. And he was also not an important person in the narrative. Like, we didn't have to read about White Boy 300 million times, the same way we had to read about Twin 300 million times. And I just felt that, like, while it's true that, in these hyper religious families and black families and Latinx families, like, there's a difference in how being queer could be treated. Um, but it just, none of how like his whole character arc really bothered me. Um, yeah, so I was not a fan of that. I also felt that while like I watched Jessie talk about it in her Blackathon vlogs about how in Latinx families, because she is Latinx and I'm not. I mean, I have Latinx cousins, but it's not the same thing. I'm not a Latinx person. So, how in Latinx families there is a difference between how boys are treated and how the girls are treated, and I could understand that. But the way that Xiomara was described, it bothered me only because Xavier was gay. And so you had Xavier being the stereotypical, like, perfect person who never did anything wrong, who was never physically violent, who was, like, this prim, proper person who was on, like, this pedestal in their mother's eyes, which part of that is cultural, and I can understand that aspect. But then you had Xiomara, who was, like, the complete opposite, and it was just, like, there was something about that dynamic that when I was reading it, it just rubbed me the wrong way, and I was not here for it, and I couldn't fuck with it. I couldn't fuck with it, and I wanted to fuck with it so bad. But the moment that Xavier was introduced to the narrative, part of me checked out because I was like, this doesn't, like, it didn't add up for me. It didn't add up, and it kind of, like, ruined my enjoyment a little bit. I also thought that it was really dumb how we had to, even though he's a side character whose love life should not have been important, it was made important so he could be like the suffering gay character who had no love interest and then was like had one at the very end of the book. And I was like, either give him a love interest or don't. Like, just because he's not like, it's not like this is his story. So like his romantic arc should not be important to the narrative. And so that also, it bothered me a little bit. It bothered me. Again, it should not be important because it's not his story, it's Xiomara's story. And I think that her whole arc was fine, although I do want to say that I think that her romance was just not fun to read. It just wasn't. Like, at no point did I feel that any of it was genuine. It did. And maybe that's because I was really actually invested in the storyline between Xiomara and her mother. I thought that was the most interesting relationship I've ever read about in a YA novel. Partially because in YA it's very often, I think, like, the cliche is that they aren't around. But her mother was so present, and that relationship, that dynamic was so relatable and so believable, and, like, it worked, it clicked for me on every level that I didn't need the romance because I didn't think it didn't work. I didn't care. I didn't care when he checked out of the narrative like halfway through the book. I was not waiting for him to come back because I was really invested in the narrative between Xiomara and her mother, and that's what really made the book. I think people should read the book just for that because I think that both characters have really great arcs, and I think that they have really, it's a really relatable aspect of the book. So those are my thoughts. As this was the Blackathon group book, I feel like there will be a lot of discussion that we can have in the comments. So I would love to have that discussion with you guys. I feel like I'm leaving a lot of stuff out, so I'll also leave a link to my written review just in case that I wrote something in that I forgot to say here if you want to read that. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope you really enjoyed the book. I did enjoy the book. Like, I know I just had like a 10-minute little whatever about how those issues were, but I feel like those are the parts that I would love to talk about the most. Slight, I guess there could be slight spoilers. I'll include that in the title so people will just know. So there won't be a thing in the corner. So yeah, let me know down in the comments what you thought. I would love to have that discussion. Let's conversate. And I'll see you again in my next video. But until then, bye.